In this video, we'll be covering everything about the jobs page and how to set up your job pipelines. So, what do I need jobs for? Jobs act as the folders of your database. You can create a job for basically any task that you're currently working on. You're hiring for Java developers? Great, create a job for it. You're looking to find more clients? Perfect, create a job for it. Whenever you're adding contacts into your database, you can assign them to these jobs, so you know what the purpose of this contact is. Why did I bring this person into my database? It's because they are a potential client, or they are a potential candidate for my Java developer job. Simply add them to these respective jobs, and you can then set up a workflow of what steps of that job's process you want to track. You can track who's been screened, who's been contacted, who you've had a call with, and so on. You can fully customize all this. So let's get right into it and press Add New Job. From this menu, we can edit and assign all the criteria of, well, what we're going to be working on. The job title acts as the name of this job, and you basically write, what will you be doing? I'm hiring for Java developers. With this done, we actually basically have everything set up. We don't really need to go more in detail. As long as we have a name, we know what we're going to be working on, and we can actually already get started. But to go more in detail and explain all the features at your disposal, you can of course select a client company. So you can specify who hired you to find these Java developers. This is also useful because you may have multiple roles for Java developers hired by various different companies. You can then also add a multitude of different descriptions and also create your own to kind of add some documentations that can come in handy, so you don't have to always go looking around to understand what you had to do. Scrolling further down, you can set up also what the offered salaries are, if it's a remote, on-site or hybrid role, and also if there is any travel requirements. We can also set what the required skills are, what the desired skills are, and also what industries are covered. But you can actually automate your entire job screening by utilizing the ideal candidate found below here. This allows you to, well, set up the actual keywords and filters that you want to run whenever looking for someone for this specific job. The way the ideal candidate functions is that it will automatically activate this filter whenever you select this pipeline. So you don't have to spend any time loading filters, and also because there's an extra feature. Ideal candidates actually have a fitting index metric, meaning that the closer someone is to being the ideal candidate for your position, the higher they will score, and you can visually see this score and also shortlist by this score. The way to set it up, and this applies to all Jobin filters, is to simply write a keyword for what type of field you're looking for, which roles, which skills, which industries, basically any field on the LinkedIn profiles can be filtered for. So let's add a few keywords. To quickly summarize what I'm filtering for with these three keywords, I'm basically mentioning that I'm looking for anyone that has either a Java, a developer, or a software role title. You can change the command type of every keyword by hovering over them. By default, the blue color implies that it's a desired skill, so they don't necessarily have to have all three of them, but of course the more they have the better, and therefore they will score higher in that fitting index that we've mentioned earlier. If I hover over them and press the green plus button, it sets it to a must-have. So, relatively straightforward, every candidate to be considered fitting as a minimum requirement has to have specifically all the green keywords. I can also set a exclusion, so if I don't want anyone with this specific keyword, I can press the red X button, making it a excluded keyword. Of course, must-have and exclusions are, I guess, relatively straightforward, but there's a lot more customization when it comes to the optional fields. If I reset them and remove the exclusion and remove the must-have, we go back to having them as desired keywords. And if you're familiar with Boolean string searches, this doesn't mean that we're just running a filter for Java or developer or software, but it gets more advanced than this. We can in fact find that below our filter category, we have this little section. By default, it's always set to auto, so you don't necessarily have to worry about this, but if you press set manually, you can actually customize what the minimum required threshold is of how many of these desired keywords someone has to have as a minimum to be considered fitting. By default, this is set to 1, meaning that as long as they have 1 out of any of these 3 role titles, they're going to be considered reaching the minimum fitting requirement. But of course, you can customize this, so I can actually set this to 2. Meaning that I'm not specifically saying they have to have Java or they have to have developer or any other keyword. I'm simply saying that as long as they have 2 of these 3, then they're good to go. This allows you to make your filters a lot more broad and flexible, because sometimes people just don't use exactly those same keywords that you're looking for, and by setting too many must-haves, you'll end up missing out on potential good candidates. This desired criteria allows you to keep things a lot more general and broad, so you have a wider range of found candidates, but without impacting the actual competence of every result, because you can actually set a minimum requirement. Something that I also like to do is setting this to 0. If you set it to 0, this means that all 3 of these keywords are not actually required to reach the minimum requirement, meaning even if the contacts miss out on all 3 of these role titles, they'll still show up in my filter. Of course, you're never going to want to do this if this is the only filter you're running, but if you combine it with more criteria, this comes a lot more handy and allows you to make things a lot more flexible. Because the more of these keywords someone has, the higher they will score, but they don't have to have it to actually show up in our filter. Furthermore, you can also actually customize how important this specific desired keyword is, because of course, as mentioned, desired keywords aren't mandatory, so the more they have, the more desired they are, but well, some keywords might be more or less important than others. You can customize this by once again hovering over a keyword and pressing the furthest left button. You can also directly press on the keyword itself, and this will open the same page, which is a more advanced interface. This allows you to add extra details about this specific keyword. You can once again change commands if needed from must-have to optional or excluded. What we can also customize in the role titles case, if this role title should be only past, current, which is the default selection, or current and past. But we can also customize a score multiplier, because sometimes certain keywords are more important than others. So I can actually say that having the developer keyword is, say, twice as important as having any of the other desired keywords. All desired keywords will always have the 1 score multiplier, meaning you can also decrease a multiplier if something isn't particularly important. Once you create your filter and mix and match a series of different fields, you can of course also save them from the top left here. I in fact did exactly that, and I can load one in at any time. With my filter already loaded in, we can see that I have a multitude of different criteria added, for example a location radius, several company sizes, but I've all set them to 0, meaning that the candidates don't necessarily have to have it, but of course it's desired, so if they do match it, then it's even better. Since these keywords are desired, I can actually create a range of desirability based on locations, because I can add a second location as well. So for example, if I'm adding once again the Dublin filter, but this time without actually setting a radius search around it, this creates a, well, double layered location search. So people that live exactly in Dublin will be matching both my Dublin location and my 10 kilometers around Dublin filter. So, well, they'll be scoring twice as much as someone that was only living within a 10 kilometer radius around Dublin. And you can even filter for contact details. You can, for example, say that I want to only find people with an actual email address or phone numbers and so on. Or with more LinkedIn-centric information, I can say that I'm only looking to reach out to people that are already my first connections, open to work, premium, or whatever criteria I want. I usually recommend not using the contact filters, at least not for an ideal candidate, because the purpose of an ideal candidate is to actually find the competence level of someone. If you have the email or not, does not mean that they're more or less competent for the role. You should make the ideal candidate find exactly what you need for the job, and then you can later on add these additional filters as a second layered filter. So with this ideal candidate set up, we can save it and proceed to the next step. The next step being defining a recruitment process. This is because we can actually customize the workflow that we want to track. This is the default pipeline that you start out with, so that's why I mentioned that you're not forced to actually go through this entire process, because you already have something to start out with. But of course, we can customize this by pressing on the pipeline itself. From here, we have the option to add any stages that we want by simply pressing the add button, and we can then easily just type out any stage we want. I happen to have already created an interview stage. Once you create the stage, you'll easily be able to select them at any time from this selector, and they will be added to your workflow. You can customize the details of any stage you created by pressing on the stages themselves. I can in fact modify the names, descriptions, substages, and even the color of my stage. Substages come in handy when you want to add extra details about the stage, but without actually cluttering your workflow. So they're all part of my interview stage, but I can then later on specify if this interview was made through, say, a Google Meet interview or simply from a phone call. You can of course add or remove any at your leisure by using this button over here. With the stage set up, we can now place it at whatever step of the workflow we want. All your pipelines also come with built-in exit stages. You have both unsuccessful and successful exit stages. If you press on this section, you can expand it and see what exactly are these exit stages. Well, exit stages are archives. Anyone that gets added to an exit stage has basically finished your workflow, either for unsuccessful reasons because they weren't fitting or weren't interested, or if they successfully exit because they were hired. In either case, the archive stages serve the purpose of, well, basically removing someone from the workflow because you no longer need to work with them. Anyone assigned to these exit stages will in fact be hidden from your pipeline, so whenever I'm filtering from my Java developer pipeline, they won't show up. But this doesn't mean that I've lost the contact, because if in the future I happen to have any other job positions where they might be showing up as fitting, I can still offer them those other jobs as well. You can of course also customize your exit stages by using the add or remove options. Once you've created yourself a nice workflow, you can even save it as a template here at the bottom left. Simply type out the name of how you want to call it and press Make Template. You can then at any time load them in by pressing the Use a Template button. I in fact already saved it as a template and called it Example. We can in fact find the default recruiting pipeline, my example pipeline, and then the current pipeline that I'm using here at the top. Once we've set up our pipeline, we can find the internal settings. These, as the name implies, are mostly used just for us or any colleagues that are working with this role, as we can set up how many vacancies this job has, what the deadlines are, what the department units are, or any additional details that we just want to keep track of and have easier access to. Once it's all set up, we can press Continue, and this will finish the edit process. From here we can view any details that we've added about the job, if we added any descriptions, any desired salaries, and so on. They'll all be nicely listed over here. We can also view the pipeline we've created, the ideal candidate that we've created, and there is also a Candidates tab to easily track each stage of our workflow and how many people have been assigned to each of the stages. But of course, there's an even handier and easy interface to view this, which is done directly from the jobs page itself. In fact, if we open our jobs page, we can see a general overview of the pipeline's workflow. These stages will expand or shrink based on how many contacts are in each stage, basically like a funnel. We can both easily view how many people are in each particular stage, but we can also then simply hover over the stage in question and press on it to select and filter for everyone within that specific stage. You may have also noticed that in our jobs page, there's an additional stage that we hadn't created prior, which is the assigned stage. This is a default stage that is always added to your pipeline, and it serves the purpose of being a buffer. Basically, whenever we add someone to our Java developer job, they will always at first be added into the assigned stage. It serves the purpose of allowing us to distinguish between people that have simply been added to a job but haven't been interacted with yet. This basically means that you did all the work to find a contact and assign them to the job, but you ended up not actually starting to interact with them yet. So you're going to always want to keep this as empty as possible. You can also find some shortcuts for seeing how many people have been exited unsuccessfully from your pipeline, how many people have successfully been hired in this specific job, and if you simply want to see everyone within the job, regardless of what stages, you can press the Show All Candidates button as well. You can also add an annotation about the job if there's anything in particular you just want to write down and keep track of. With our Java developer job created, we can also see that we now have a 1 active job vacancy counter. This is the job openings counter, basically meaning that only a job that is actually open will count towards your job openings. If at any time we finish our Java developer job, we can simply open the job in question and close it from here on the right. This will remove it from our job openings page and then move it into the archived jobs. Archived jobs are jobs that we're no longer working on, but they can still at any time be reopened if we ever need to. The Employers of this page is instead a more client-centric interface, whereas the default jobs page simply shows you all the jobs you're working on and automatically orders them by last activity. The Employers list page instead lists all your clients, and then lists every job that this specific client has assigned to you. Automatically, by having added Google as our client, they've also been added into our accounts list. So at any time, we can more easily keep track of the companies that are most important to us. But we'll go more in detail on this on a later video. To show the ideal candidate in practice, let's add some contacts first. I'm back and I've now imported 101 contacts. I've added them to the job, and as mentioned earlier, by default they've been all added into the assigned stage because I've still not interacted with them. Now what do I need to do to activate my ideal candidate? Well, nothing really. Simply by selecting the job in question, the associated ideal candidate will automatically activate. This means that if I simply click on the assigned stage on the pipeline itself, this will, as a shortcut, automatically apply my pipeline filter, and by having a pipeline filter activated, you can now see that every contact in my listing has this bar here on the right. This bar shows me a metric on how fitting each candidate is. Jay is 63% fitting, whereas Claudette is only 16% fitting, Thomas is 23% fitting, and so on. This allows me to have a very quick overview by just looking at this small bar of how competent or how fitting someone is for those requirements that I've specified. But of course, you can also find contacts that don't meet all my minimum requirements. For example, James, which is a franchise and sales manager and has, well, nothing to do with Java developers. So, well, to cut out and polish my contact list, I can press the Show Only Fitting button. Here on the top left, we can find how many contacts are visible on the current search we're running. We're running a search for everyone in the assigned stage. If I now press Show Only Fitting, everyone that is not meeting my minimum requirements will vanish from my current selection. As we can see, it's now dropped down to just 100 since we only had one contact that wasn't actually meeting all our requirements. Now I have the option of adding more filters on top of my ideal candidate. This is what I mentioned with adding additional filters for finding people with contact info and so on, as you can simply add them on top of your pre-existing filter by simply adding them as needed from here. But there's even an additional layer to the actual ideal candidate as well, and that's the threshold that has now appeared after pressing Show Only Fitting. Because of course, we've now said that we want everyone to have at least the minimum requirements, but now the differences in score indicate how many desirable criteria someone is matching as opposed to the others. And we can set a threshold for this as well, because I can set that my minimum requirement is to at least have contacts with 50% or higher scores. So as we can see from those 100 profiles that I had imported earlier, it's now automatically shortlisted it to only the top 16. As you can see, all with a 50% or higher score. If you want, you can also sort the entire order of your contact list by who is scoring the highest or lowest, by using the sort field here at the top left. If I press this, I can set Show Highest Ranking first, and this will accordingly nicely order everything from the most fitting, which is Murillo, with a 71% fitting index, and the lowest scoring, which is James, which is of course still meeting my 50% minimum threshold. You can also notice that just above it we have yet another button, which says In Pipeline. This is because I'm running my ideal candidates only on the profiles that I've already added into the job. But if you've already sourced multiple profiles throughout the years and have a very large database, there's no need to always source new profiles and, well, start from scratch. You can in fact run this ideal candidate on any profile you had previously imported. So instead of having to always start from zero, simply create an ideal candidate, switch to Not in Pipeline, and any profile that you have not yet assigned into this job will be scanned and detected so that you can say, great, let's add them to the job as well. In my case, all the fitting candidates for this job have already been assigned to the job. You can also switch this to All so that we can see both people in the pipeline and outside of the pipeline as long as they meet my 50% threshold. We can even see a small label on every profile that shows us what stage they're exactly in. In fact, they all have this gray pipeline icon because they're all in my assigned stage. But of course, let's say we've now shortlisted and found exactly who's the best fit. How do we now move them into a later stage? Well, all it takes is to simply select who we want to move. You can find all the instructions on how to run various selections from this menu here on the right. My personal favorite is to simply drag and drop and make a bulk selection. So let's say we've selected these 6 contacts and want to interact with them. We have this bar here that appeared at the bottom of the screen, And from here, we have the options of either removing them from the pipeline. This is the rejection stage. So in case they're not fitting, not interested, we can simply add them into this and they will vanish from our Java developer job. In fact, if I do so, I can specify a substage to give a reason as to why I'm rejecting them. So I can say that, for example, they're not interested. I press confirm and see that they've now vanished from my results list. If instead I assign contacts to a different stage of my pipeline, by using the assign stage option, I can, for example, move them to my screen stage. And once again, I can add a substage if I want to add any extra details. I can, of course, customize and add my own if needed as well. And by confirming, we can now see that they have a different icon, which is in fact the screened contact as soon as possible stage, as opposed to the others that are still in my assigned stage. As for the contacts that we have added to the exit stage, they have vanished from our filter, but they haven't vanished from our database. So of course we can still find them at any time. Or we can even filter for them specifically if we select a stage filter here on the left and say that we want to specifically find everyone in an unsuccessful exit stage. So of course this will show the 6 contacts that we've rejected earlier. Thanks to the pipeline's workflow, we can easily see who is in exactly which stages at any time. But of course, we also want to know the history of when something has happened. So if I, for example, open the screen stage again and see my 4 contacts, when I specifically select someone's profile, I can head over to the Events tab here on the right, and this will show me the history of exactly what happened and when. When we've imported Ismail, when we've assigned them to the job, when they've been updated, which is the full profile import that occurred in the background, and when we then move them to the screen stage. Any interaction we have with someone will be tracked, so we can easily remember exactly when what happened at any time. This goes both for pipeline movements, but also general interactions, like when we actually send messages, send emails, receive responses, replies, and so on. So you can use these event timelines to nicely track exactly what's been going on with this specific person at all time. Whereas the job pipelines help in keeping a general overview of the workflow for that specific job that you're working on.